Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you today, Ken?
I'm well, thank you for asking, Rory. Thank you to you for tuning in to listen to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. You're catching Rory and myself at episode 193. We're going to be looking at 3 topics today, starting off with student check-in, where we look at something that a student may come across on their journey. And today, I think it's a topic that will appeal to both students and qualified practitioners, because we're looking at our own personal development, but we're going to see how that links to various counselling theories. And then we go into our brand new section, the focus on supervision. We either take supervision or deliver supervision, and possibly we do both during our journey as counsellors and psychotherapists. So interesting topic we're going to be looking at in focus on supervision is we're going to be looking at the boundaries that are held in supervision from the point of view of the supervisor. And then into practice matters, where we go delve into practice and what a practitioner may come across within their practice. And again, I think it's going to be a topic that's going to appeal to many today. We have Clint Adams that met up with Rory. Clint recently did a lecture for the Counsellor CPD lecture library on tackling destructive thought patterns. Now, I can certainly relate to that from my own life. I have destructive thought patterns from time to time where I have been known to push the self-destruct button, Rory, in the past. But of course, we're going to be looking at that from a practitioner's perspective of when we see that from a client's presentation. But that student check-in, personal development linked to theory. But I want to start this, Rory. Is there really any personal development that would happen during counselling training? He asks knowingly.
Well, you know, without sounding like someone from a pantomime, Ken. Oh, yes, there is. So, absolutely. And it's a topic that comes up a lot in our Facebook page. And if you're not a member of our Facebook page, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, knock on the door. We are a closed group. We'll let you in, and you'll be joining thousands and thousands of like-minded people, students, professional practitioners, qualified practitioners, supervisors, and a soup song of tutors who all hang out and talk about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And during the arc of any counselling training, you'll be asked to write an assignment on how the theory you have studied impacts on your own life. And it's one, as being a former tutor, that can give students a little bit of difficulty. But I think that if you look at the theory, you know, if you're asked to do this as an assignment, if you look at the theory and the theories you've studied, and let's have a look at the kind of theories that people study. They may study person-centered, they may study CBT or REBT or transactional analysis. Those are usually the 3 popular ones, or maybe Freudian's psychoanalytical or psychodynamic ideas. So what you'll be asked to do is take one of the theories and then think about how that might apply to your own life. And, you know, there's some quick wins here, isn't there? If you're studying person-centered theory, have a look at introjected values and conditions of worth. Were you given as a child ideas that you had to live up to that were uncomfortable to you? That is, I think that most people, if they're asked that, would possibly say yes. I think anybody who's been to school may find that there's an introjected value of you have to do your best work and you have to do this. And that might give you a condition of worth that you have to all the time do your best work. I can remember going to school, and in one of the classrooms they had a sign above the blackboard: only your best is good enough. And it's you know, Ken, it still sends chills through my spine now. That, yeah, as someone who's dyslexic, even my best wasn't good enough. So thinking about that and relating it to the theory, what the question's asking you is, think about the theories you've studied. And maybe if you're doing a practice-based course, the theories that you're working with clients with, and how do they apply to you?
Yep. And so personal development is inevitable. If you're studying counselling, you're going to be looking at yourself. You're going to be hearing theories relating yourself, your own life, to those theories, and having what we call those light bulb moments. Rory and I lectured counselling at practice level for some years together, and that was something we came across often, where a student would say, wow, I had a real light bulb moment today, in recognition of themselves and their own journey. They may have realised something that was unseen to self before, kind of clicks in and just hits the mark right there and then. It's almost like, I always knew that, but the pieces of the puzzle have now fallen into place. And the advice we would give is, put it down in your journal. And this is my first point. If you're looking at that personal development, you are going to be writing an assignment about that. Journal regularly. Journal how it's going for you on a daily basis or a weekly basis. And when journaling, journal the feelings, what's coming up, and have a think of how that might relate to your personal development. If you're journaling regularly, when you come to that assignment module on writing about your personal development linked to the theories you're studying, it makes it easy peasy lemon squeezy. I think that's the scientific term for it, Rory. You could just go back to your journal, and the wealth of information is there, because we forget. Even I can't remember the light bulb moments that I had when I was studying, but I know I had many when I'm looking back on it. So if we write them down, that's a great tip. And I study person-centered therapy. I do remember some of those life-changing moments in my own personal development. One of them was related to frame of reference. I thought pretty much that what I believed and the way I saw the world was the truth. And it was. It was my truth of me at that point in my life. But I remember very well, Rory, in a lecture on frame of reference and kind of looking at the world, where the world came tumbling down, where I realized that my truths are not true. They're just held as truth by me, and they may be very different for someone else. And Rory uses a great example of two practitioners, two students standing looking out the same window from where we taught together, and then maybe writing down 4 or 5 things that they can see out of the window. Compare the notes from the two students. They're going to have written down different things, because different things are different. People perceive things differently, and the importance of things differently. Some low-hanging fruit, I think. If you are studying person-centered, this Carl Rogers' 7 stages of process. Really interesting theory. Go and have a look at that. Maybe map, where am I in those 7 stages of process? Where was I when I started my counselling journey with relation to the 7 stages of process? Have I moved? Because there you are, you're linking your personal development to a theory. Frame of reference we've already spoken about. Rory, you mentioned introjected values. Boy, are we surrounded by introjected values, where the values of others are taken on by us unknowingly and become our own truths. That can be handed to us from parents, from teachers, from adverts. If you drink the right drink, you'll be more popular. If you wear the right clothes, you're going to be more popular. These are values of others that are introjected into us, and we accept them as our truths. We think that it is our own truth, but they're given to us by someone else. The personal development is recognizing that, being able to let go of those. And one of my personal favorites, which kind of borders, I would say, onto the more contemporary views of person-centered theory, which is configurations of self. That theory that suggests that there is a dialogical self, or more than one part to us as a person. I can certainly relate to that within my own mind. I have a number of different voices, and I don't mean in a mental health sense. It's kind of one voice, but it tells me different things at different times. It may even argue with itself. It'll say, oh, maybe I should do this. Oh, no, because if I do that, then this is going to happen. But if I do that, and you get this, it's almost like a round table discussion happening within my head. I will have a judge that will judge me and tell me what I should have done and how I could have done it better. I have a self-destruct person that will come out and push the old big red button and blow up my life from time to time. And this is from my own experience. But that dialogical self, or the different configurations of self, another great theory for mapping to that personal development.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I'd point to TA, parent, adult, and child.
Ooh.
Just think, that's a really useful one. Just think about going through your day, and how often do you find yourself in the adult, or how often do you find yourself in the child or the parent position? And I think that's a very useful one. And I think it's a fun one and an easy one to draw from, because I speak for myself. There are times when I find myself in the child mode or in the critical parent mode. So doing that, I think, is really useful. And I've got one plea for people who are doing this. I think, from my experience of people writing assignments, one of the things that gives hesitancy in putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard is that people feel that they may be disloyal to people close to them. They may think that if they write down, that maybe their parents or their caregivers had put in interjected values, that would in some way be disloyal, and that might be being disrespectful. And it's not. It's just that these things are, we gain interjected values. Sometimes those values, as Ken said, are our perception of it, not the reality. So we can have a perception of an interjected value, but actually, as we go through life, we realize actually that was just our own stuff. It wasn't what people were putting onto us. So I would say, don't audit yourself. If you feel that you need to, write about someone who's close to you, do that. And it may be that they have absolutely no conception. It may be that if you've had very strong interjected values and conditions of worth, that both parties would understand that was the case. But generally speaking, it can be a perceptual idea, not necessarily reality. So don't feel too bad if you have to kind of write about maybe parents, maybe siblings, maybe friends, because it's a theoretical assignment. It's just asking you what your perception of the theory is and how it may have impacted on yourself.
Yeah, when you were delving into transactional analysis there, Rory, I remember looking at life scripts from a personal development perspective as well. And there's also another rich vein I certainly could recognize within my own life. I would get into situations and the script that I was carrying around with me, the life scripts kind of indicates that the very basics of the theory is that you have a pre-written script that is subconscious. You can't see it. You don't know you're playing it out, but you play out the same script over and over again. And one of mine that I recognized during my training was that of I found it very difficult to trust people, and I was going into any kind of relationship or interaction with it's only a matter of time before they're going to let me down and show themselves to be untrustworthy. And that was the script I had. And anytime anybody did or a situation came up where I perceived somebody had let me down or not been trustworthy, I would go, ha! You see, there it is. And I was reinforcing, taking the script out, taking the highlighter and highlighting it and underlying it and saying, you see the value of this script that I'm carrying in my pocket. And that, of course, was unseen to self, but learning the theory of transactional analysis, as we did as a comparative therapy from my base therapy, my main modality, which was person-centered, I remember doing the personal development around life scripts and finding it really interesting. So there's a lot there. As Rory said, this is about personal development. So when you are writing and there are people that may have played a part in your past, we're writing from the perception of self. We're doing personal development, not past people who are in our lives' development. We can't do anything about what was past, and very often it is that perception. And they're not always harmful interactions that we take maybe an introjected value from or a condition of worth from. There can be positive interactions. And one of the examples I like to use is a student that does well at school, that's a high achiever, that gets rewarded by the teachers, where the teachers are going, oh, well done, that's fantastic, would take the report card back to the parents, and her parents would say, oh, that's so good, you're so clever. And this student then goes on to do well in primary school, in high school, in college, in university, and does incredibly well, goes into a working relationship, does really well in the working environment, until the time that person may come across a situation where they're not able to get through it, and suddenly everything comes crushing down because they have this condition of worth that I have to be doing great, I have to be rewarded by people, that's who I am. And of course that is their perception from the road that they have travelled, and it's been a positive reinforcement road. So there's just an example of how we can end up having these introjected values, these conditions of worth, even from a purely positive road that we've walked. It's all about how we perceive it and how we develop ourselves through the arc of our training, of course, well into practice, and hopefully for myself for the rest of my life.
Absolutely. It is a lifelong endeavour, as you say, Ken. And we have a handout for you. So if you go to counsellingtutor.com, find the podcast tab, go to podcast 193. I've created a handout that's going to give you a very good starter on how you link theory to personal development. So make sure you get that handout because it's waiting for you.
Oh, Rory's super duper handout. You got to get that and add it to your handout file, whether that's a digital handout file you keep on your computer, or you can print them out as well. So there you have it. That is our student check-in. Moving now into our new section, that's Focus on Supervision. And today we're going to be speaking about boundaries in supervision.
Focus on supervision.
Well, I can remember my very first supervision meeting on a cold November day in 2002, where I skulked, and I use that term advisedly. I skulked as a very nervous supervisor and undergraduate to my supervisor's house, as it was at that time. We met in a house, and I had no idea what supervision was. I was frightened to death, and I can remember my supervisor, when we were doing the contracting, saying to me, if you need to contact me, you can phone me. And it was a landline number, so it wasn't a mobile phone number, it was a landline number. Phone me on this landline number and I will give you half an hour of emergency supervision. But I want you to think, Rory, she said, I want you to think, is it really an emergency? And one of the very, very interesting things about that was that right from the outset, she was setting a boundary. In other words, what she was doing was she was saying to me, there's our supervision meetings, we'll put them in the diary. If you need to contact me in an emergency, you can phone me and we'll make an appointment to meet up. But what I couldn't do was just phone her all the time if there was something that I needed to check out. What she was saying to me is, you're going to use your wider network to your tutors, your peers, maybe the people in your practice, in your agency, to check things out. But if you need to contact me, you can. And in supervision, boundaries are really, really important. A few years ago, I was attending a conference with a colleague. It wasn't Ken, it was another colleague. And the colleague saw her supervisor. She said, it's good to have a quick word with my supervisor. And the supervisor said, well, it's lovely to see you, but I'm being very boundaried today. And I'll be happy to see you in this next supervision session. And my colleague came back. She said, I think that's a bit harsh. And I said, well, I guess she's setting boundaries. And it's really, really important, because setting boundaries as a supervisor allows the education and the modeling of setting boundaries as a therapist. And it's a really important concept, I think, to travel through all of therapy, be you a supervisor or a practitioner.
So we're speaking about boundaries within a supervisory relationship. But what's interesting, if you go back to your formal counselling studies, even at those early stages, one of the things you would have been asked to do is write down a definition of what counselling is. And part of that definition would have included that counselling is a boundaried exercise. Counselling itself is boundaried. And as a counsellor, we know that we need to put boundaries in place for working with our clients safely and ethically. We work within boundaries, whether those boundaries are understood by ourselves and they're understood by our clients. Why are they there? Well, they keep our clients safe because they know where the boundaries sit. They know that if they step over, let's say a confidentiality boundary, if here in the United Kingdom, if a client was to say that they are laundering money, they would know that the counsellor would have a legal obligation to report that, because it would be set out as a boundary. It's a stop. It's kind of the end. You can't go past it. If you do go past it, there is some kind of a consequence. That is the concept of a boundary. And of course, the same is true within a supervisor-supervisee relationship. And the supervisee-supervisor relationship is very different from the counsellor-client relationship, which is therapeutic and it is in service of the client. In the supervisee-supervisor relationship, there may be therapeutic elements to it in the restorative part of the triangle. If you listened to our podcast last week, that's what we covered. But mainly, it is in service, again, of the client, and the supervisor is keeping an eye over the practice of the supervisee. Supervisee may be in client contact and things will come up for them that they want to take to their supervisor. One of the first things that we would say when we were tutoring together, Rory, if a student brought something and they were in placement and said, there's something that's come up with a client, the first question we would say is, have you taken it to your supervisor? It's what we do. We take it to our supervisor, and there can be an element of urgency. I need to deal with this. I need to sort this out. I need to go to my supervisor now, but I'm only seeing my supervisor next week or in 2 weeks' time. How is that handled? Of course, it's handled by having the boundaries, the rules of engagement laid out at the beginning of the relationship, and that a supervisor will lay those boundaries out with the supervisee in the same way as you as a counsellor will lay out the boundaries with your clients. However, when we're looking from a supervisor point of view, so when we're looking out and we are the supervisor, we're not just looking at the boundaries that we hold as a supervisor with our supervisees. In other words, you can contact me in between sessions, but it's going to be a 15-minute call. We're also looking out for the boundaries within our supervisees' relationship with their client. So we're holding our own boundaries. So it's like a big fence that goes around the supervisee's practice as well, where the supervisor will be looking how the counsellor is working and looking at the boundaries that are in place with the counsellor, and looking out for those boundaries being nudged, being broken. And it could be that a counsellor comes in and says, oh, I have the client that's presented with X, Y, and Z, and she had some troubles last week, so gave me a call. And I said, okay, we'll pick that up at the next session. I, as the supervisor, might be saying, what are your boundaries around being contacted outside of your sessions? And I would be looking out for those boundaries as well. And I think that's the main thing with supervision, is that you have an eye on your supervisory practice. You may be in counselling practice, you're looking over that as well. And you're also looking over the practice of your supervisees. So everything you apply within your own practice, you're looking out for within your supervisee's practice too.
I totally agree, and I think that was a very well observed piece there, Ken, if you don't mind me saying. I also think that in an online world, it becomes even more pressing. A lot of people now are working online as well as in the room face to face, and of course we're contactable on a number of different modes: email, phone. I think a supervisor would be very, very clear on what channel you can make contact on. And my view of that is that would be either by phone, by email, or by text on the phone, as opposed to social media. I don't think, I don't think any supervisor would accept a friend's request from a supervisee. When I think of boundaries, I'm always drawn to kind of people putting fences on their land, maybe in the wide plains of America where people are fencing a ranch off. And what they're doing is you're doing it together with your supervisee. A supervisor will help the supervisee build that kind of professional fence that surrounds them, and it's done together. And I think it's done through collaborative learning. I think that it can be very easy to have a very, very fixed boundary about something until there's an event that comes along where you think, maybe I need to look at how far or near I put that boundary in. So I will give you an example of that. For students, if I supervise students, I would say to them, I would be very, very boundaried about when they could contact me and talk about the kind of issues that they may want to come to. So usually this will be about maybe they feel that they are not competent enough to work with the client, and that they're feeling they've got feelings of not being good enough. I think that would be something that you would bring up in a supervision session. That's not an emergency. That's not an emergency supervision. However, if it was something that was quite serious, child protection, harm to self or harm to others, then I would say, well, I would tell them exactly what they could come to me for in what constituted an emergency. With a qualified and seasoned practitioner, you wouldn't have to have that specific conversation. You would just say, obviously if there's an emergency, you could come to me, but you wouldn't have to spell it out as much. That's how I run my supervision practice. And what that does for me is say to the student, okay, there are times when practice may be uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. And that's the time you may want to reflect in between supervision sessions. However, there are times when there may be a clear and present danger or something that you're really, really worried about. That's the time to contact me. So it really is about getting them into the mode of what they can handle themselves, what they may need to think about themselves, and what constitutes, I really do need to speak to my supervisor. That's how I run my supervision practice. I would imagine that other supervisors would work in a different way, Ken.
Yeah, I like the white fence. I can see it, Rory, in my head. I get the beautiful green grass with this lovely white picket fence, which is the boundary. And that's exactly what a boundary is. It's a hard stop. It's interesting. I was looking over some property legal documents just yesterday, funnily enough. And one of the things that is done during the purchase and sale of a home is the boundaries are re-established of what the land boundaries are of that home. And they refer back to when the last survey was done and what the boundaries were then. And they go back and they look, are those boundaries still in place? And that makes a lot of sense. And it's to stop people, stealing a foot of land from their neighbor when they've moved house or something and just moving the fence a bit. These things are checked. You can't move a boundary. A boundary is an unmovable. It doesn't bend. It's a stopping point. However, there are times when boundaries are broken. And when a boundary is broken, there is an opportunity to renegotiate that boundary. So an example of that, and I'm just going to use timekeeping. So supervision session is from X o'clock to Y o'clock, and the supervisee arrives at X o'clock plus 10 minutes, 10 minutes late, or 10 minutes early. Same thing, and comes knocking on the supervisor's door either 10. In fact, that happened to me in one of my early supervision sessions. I was very keen, wanted to show I was keen. So how better to show that I was keen by arriving 10 minutes early? It's what you do if you're going for a job interview and you want to show that you're nice and keen. You arrive early. So I went and knocked on the supervisor's door 10 minutes before the session, and supervisor came. Somebody came to the door and suggested I go and sit in my car for 10 minutes and come back. And then we had a bit of a chat in supervision about the boundary of arriving on time. So it was renegotiated and put in place. If somebody is 10 minutes late, you might say, I do understand that you're going to be late, but our starting time is X o'clock. I see that you are 10 minutes late. Supervisee may say, yes, well, the traffic was particularly busy. supervisor may then say, I fully understand that. So let's think how we can renegotiate this boundary. So if this happens again, you can let me know before the starting time so that I'm aware. Is there a possibility to give me a call? Is there a possibility to send me a text? So the boundary is renegotiated. They break, they don't move. It's something that is strong and in place, and sets out the relationship and how the relationship works within that. I think it's an interesting topic. I think we could speak for a very long time on boundaries in general. If you're interested in training as a clinical supervisor, Counselling Tutor have a course. It is a advanced certificate in clinical supervision, including online working. So that would qualify a counsellor to become a supervisor, working both in a face-to-face, in the room capacity, but also having the skills to work safely, ethically, delivering supervision to supervisees online, via email, via telephone. And if you're interested in that, Rory headed up that course. It's pretty comprehensive. You can get more information by going to our website, counsellingtutor.com. And what's unique about our online clinical supervision course is you can take the entire course online. There is a live tutor-led element to the course where you will attend classes via Zoom, but that you can do the whole course without having to drive to a specific place. So if you're interested, counsellingtutor.com, the information is there for you, because I think it's an important topic, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think anybody who is in supervision will know what boundaries are. But I think I would pick up on your point, Ken, that boundaries can happen anyway. It could be a time boundary. It could be an ethical boundary. It could be, as you say, somebody who comes to supervision and starts to talk about personal material and tries to use the session for therapy. There's another time a supervisor would say, well, it sounds like you're having a difficult time. However, that is for personal therapy. We're here in the service of the client today. So yeah, it's an interesting part, and it's one I think that supervisors and practitioners should be paying attention to it all the time, the boundaries of their practice.
Keeping to our time boundaries, it's now time for us to go into our next section, Practice Matters. Clint Adams, Rory, you met up with Clint after he delivered a lecture for the Counsellor CPD Library and spoke about destructive thought patterns, how they can be tackled.
Yes, I spoke with Clint Adams, who is in Australia. So it was evening for him and morning for me. And Clint talks about in the lecture how to work with destructive thought patterns. And he comes from a very pluralistic perspective. It's quite a refreshing space to be in. And this is what he had to say.
Practice Matters.
And we're here today with Clint Adams, who's in Australia. So we're going to say good day to you, although when we record this, it is the evening in Australia. And you've done a fantastic lecture for our Counsellor CPD Library on working with clients with destructive thought patterns. So, Clint, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. But yes, we had a great lecture, and obviously trying to bring things from a little bit of a different angle that a lot of the students and the counsellors are probably a little bit used to. So it was great. Yeah,
well, we're really open to new ideas, and destructive thought patterns can be very kind of debilitating for clients. So when we talk about destructive thought patterns, what are we actually talking about? How would that present in terms of what the client might tell us?
Yeah, so I guess to give it some context, my background's been in working as a counsellor for Victoria Police, which is a police force here in Australia. My background's in psych, as in my studies, and then I did counselling, more studies in that space. But then over the years, I've developed programs, but also worked more in leadership with teams at a work level, looking at normal health and well-being and blah, blah, blah. So I guess my approach is probably evolved into the program that I was talking to in the lecture, and the stuff around not so much as a counsellor one-on-one, because I've done that, but I've kind of looked at it and looked at not all, but a lot of different methods that we have, listened to people who are experts, who are clinicians, who do research and say, well, what's more effective and all this stuff. And for me, it shows that there's a lot of methods are effective, and a lot of people get different stuff out of different methods. And so for me, it's not about focusing on one, it's about the person actually understanding more about themselves and how we create thought patterns. So childhood trauma, for example, is a big indicator of higher risk in the future, right? From having maybe mental health problems. I'm just using that as one example. But then I've also worked with police, for example, who might have one instance. They've never had any childhood trauma. They've been usually quite robust and, seem quite, I say normal is not the right word, but, quite comfortable in their own skin and all that. Then they have one event that just changes their whole ability to function at a good level from a mental health perspective, and they go to pieces sort of stuff. So all these things can lead to a point, but ultimately it's about understanding for yourself how you can get out of that, what you can do differently, finding different methodologies that are out there that work for you, not, you got to go see a counsellor, so they send you to someone who does NLP or something and it just doesn't work, or you guys don't have a great relationship, so you think, counselling's for chumps, I don't want to be involved. So for me, it's about people understanding more about them and then knowing that, hey, there's many ways to the top of this mountain to change some of these habits that I've formed, whether I formed years ago when I was a kid and I didn't even notice, or I've had this instance where I've had a problem and now it's creating a mental rehearsal that's now causing me those destructive thought patterns. And so for me, I guess that's kind of been a big focus of how I come in probably a little bit differently from the norm, because I kind of go, mate, there's heaps of different counselling. You can go and try some, but don't lose faith if the first one doesn't work for you. Try something else. Look at you, ask yourself questions, analyze how you're thinking, noticing your thought patterns and how that's actually destructive for you. And, so for me, that's kind of where I come from.
So it very much sounds like you're saying to the client, you're the best expert on yourself. There's lots of help out there, but actually you might want to think about what particularly works for you. You're really focused on tailoring, if you like, the curative aspect to the actual person, as opposed to prescribing a model to them.
Yeah, I use an example. I'll give you an example. So many is like I say to people, why do you think people who have a dog live longer? Right, and it's proven that happens. But there's a reason physiologically that happens. Your oxytocin levels go up. My daughter's got a brand new bulldog. I walk it down the street, and people who are just walking, they see this dog, and their faces change. They go up to the dog, and they're all excited. The whole energy changes just in that one instance. And so for me, I'm saying, hey, you mightn't be a dog person, but what gets your oxytocin levels up? Have you, hanging out with a child, doing something at the zoo, or, you're a cat person? All these things can have the same effect. So let's explore some of those things that work for you. So for me, that's kind of where I come from.
Yeah, and it's interesting, in the UK, we're talking about pluralistic practice. In other words, tailor-made interventions for clients. We're saying to the client, well, what is most useful for you? Instead of coming from a theoretical modality and applying, say, CBT or Gestalt or the many other models, we're coming from different directions to say, well, what works for you? Would you say that the approach that you have, it would be broadly pluralistic?
Yeah, definitely. And it's more in a self-exploration phase. Like for me, I guess, how do I put it? A lot of times when I run stuff at a work level, when I was dealing with just general work people in groups doing health and well-being stuff to kind of get them there, I almost get to, and then people come to me afterwards and go, wow, I didn't know my brain worked that way. I didn't know I made decisions with my body and my brain together. So we all think we make decisions up here, but how we feel is such an important part of it. So it got me not thinking, but it got me really understanding that a lot of the people in general population are unconsciously incompetent around their own mental health and their own well-being because they don't know. So for me, I see myself as the person saying, I'm going to make you consciously incompetent, where you, wow, actually, no, I don't know this stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it. How do I find out more? So then, there's lots of books out there, Joe Dispenza's stuff's out there. I'm the placebo, you are the placebo, books like that. So then people start to get a thirst for that knowledge, and the more they know, the more equipped they are to deal with stuff. And they go, wow, that really resonates with me, and this doesn't, and that does. And, talking and having stuff like this podcast and running lectures and getting people excited about that, where they go, wow, I didn't know this. And that's kind of where I really want people to ask those questions. Like if you're in counselling yourself, hey, your methods might be great, but be aware that not everyone's going to respond the same way. So maybe you need to add some, not strings to your bow, but know enough about some other things that may work, do things that get them thinking, say, go and do your own homework, come back to me, that kind of stuff. So I'm very much about not just saying LP and this is the only thing that works for me. So I'm not bagging any kind of modality. I'm saying think about, the person and what can, and you might, and this is where I think a good model for counselling in general would be, hey, this person might respond better to that person, and they might be a referral system that works because, that's just what I'm picking up from this person, that kind of stuff. So, there's many ways we can work as counsellors and work together to actually enhance what we're doing.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like there's a big aspect, or a big aspect would be the correct way of saying it. A big aspect of psychological education, helping people to think, well, what will be best for me? How can I look after my mental health? What do I not know about my mental health, and how can I find out? And
yes,
and saying to therapists in a way, maybe there's lots of different routes to mental well-being and destructive thought patterns and not having them.
Definitely. Look, one of the key things I run is something I call red brain, blue brain. Clinicians will get apart because I try to keep it broad. A lot of the stuff, unfortunately, when I've done even my studies, is come from academics. And academics are great, don't get me wrong, good researchers, all that, but they're not necessarily practical. So some of that high-level stuff, and I read a lot, something you would be the same, where you read stuff and go, wow, that is high level. How do I make it practical for Joe Blow who's walking in the street, doesn't really want to know about, neurotransmitters and all kinds of crap going on in their brains and stuff. They just want to know, what can I do to, help me along the way? So for me, I kind of think of myself as the person that kind of brings some of that and make it practical and look at ways that people can go, okay, I can go and play with a puppy. And I can go and look at, some great art, or take a child out and make up a game and watch them giggle and all that stuff, because it makes me feel good about stuff. I can volunteer with, a lot of times we know what to do, but we don't know why we're doing it. Like people say, go and sit out and look at a beautiful landscape and it makes you feel better. But why? Well, why does it make you feel better on a physiological level? You're taking time, you're calming yourself, you're thinking of it, even just planning things. Like, people don't understand this, where blue brain comes in. It's a future thinking using your frontal cortex. And by planning something, you're changing what's wrong in your life to, hey, I'm planning for something better. That switch is using a different part of your brain, and understanding enough about that is what makes the difference. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think what I'm hearing is a refreshing kind of attitude towards how we work with clients with mental health. We're giving it back to them, saying, we'll give you the tools, if you like. You think about what will make your well-being feel better, knock out these destructive thought patterns. So one final question, Clint. For the people who watch your lecture, what do you hope they will learn or take away?
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, it's about people at least not, I guess, as a counsellor or someone that's doing that stuff, it's easy sometimes to get fixated on your modality and because you know about it, whether it's LP or Gestalt or whatever it is. I guess for me, it's about people understanding that, whatever can help people and be comfortable and I guess, improving, I guess, your own skills and breadth of knowledge. Like for me, for example, there's a lot of work on energy and people understanding how their energy fields are and stuff like that. That's not something I understand that well, but I know that it can work for some people. So, talking about it, exploring it for me is kind of okay. I'm okay that if someone else wants to go and that with them resonates with them, or they feel comfortable to work in that realm, let's go and look at it. For me, it's about getting people who, people along the way is the key for me. And so, I guess I hope to open up that to people to say, hey, for me, there's a key skill, which is changing the focus and using that blue brain frontal cortex stuff, but using it in a way that the person explores it. But if your methods aren't the one for them, then, looking at other ways to help them is another part of it, I guess.
Well, I think you've explained yourself very eloquently, Clint. And I know this is going to be a really good lecture. It's going to get people to think maybe out of the box and think really differently, which is always exciting. So, Clint Adams, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you to Clint Adams. Thank you to you, Rory, for reaching out and having a chat with Clint there. And if you're interested in tackling destructive thought patterns, you want to listen to or watch rather Clint's lecture, you can get that in the Counsellor CPD library. If you are a member, log in. You will see it in your dashboard. If you're not a member of the Counsellor CPD library, you can get more information by just going to counsellingtutor.com. Just to say that the Counsellor CPD library is for qualified practitioners only, and it's a focus on helping us sharpen our competence within our practice in service of our clients. And of course, lectures are certified, so you can download a certificate after finishing those, and you can use that certificate to evidence your learning hours with your ethical body. So there you have it, counsellingtutor.com if you're interested in the Counsellor CPD library.
Yeah, what a interesting podcast it is, if I do say so myself. We started off with personal development linked to theory, the very important aspect of being able to recognize the theory as it relates to self. We went on to discuss boundaries in supervision and the many boundaries that supervision has and why they're important. And then finally, I met up with Clint Adams, who gave us an overview of the lecture on tackling destructive thought patterns. And as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and hey, join the digital counselling revolution.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counsellor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counsellor CPD library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.